peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, which is going to be a round 2 of this coming on Monday, it's already falling apart. And that's because the Russians are just not serious when it comes to a ceasefire, and we're getting a lot of information at this time. Some from the Russian envoy to the UN, some from Donald Trump, some from Zelensky and his office, and so we figured let's go ahead and break down what exactly is happening here. Because from the comments we're seeing from the Russian side, not only do they not want a ceasefire, they don't even have a plan on what they want from Ukraine except for that master demand. There's nothing that they've put out that is like a concession on something. And so before we get started, make sure you subscribe, you turn on notifications, and you give this video a thumbs up. Let's go ahead and get started. It was Vladimir Putin who originally called for the original meeting that Thursday a couple weeks ago because of the pressure that Donald Trump put forward, which was, hey, Vlad, either you're going to do a complete ceasefire or we're going to put more sanctions onto you and more weapons for Ukraine. Putin's 1:30 in the morning phone call led to a meeting on Thursday in Istanbul in which there was no ceasefire. Russia made a bunch of demands, but at least something was agreed to, which was a prisoner exchange, 1,000 for 1,000. And we were told that after that happened, Russia was going to send over their proposal for peace and a ceasefire, and Ukraine would do the same thing, in which Ukraine got done within a few days and sent it out to all of its partners, including Russia. And Russia said they sent it out. There's been nothing sent out. Nothing. Nothing from the United States. They didn't get anything. Nothing from European leaders and nothing from Ukraine, though Russia, in their own way, said that they already sent it out. The only things we've seen so far is a list of demands, the same demands that Russia's been asking for since day one of their invasion. And so this lack of list and information has gotten a lot of people frustrated. Donald Trump getting frustrated again with Vladimir Putin because over the Memorial Day weekend, Vladimir Putin decided to launch a barrage of missiles and drone strikes into Ukraine, killing civilians, which they do every single day. And maybe now it's just now that Donald Trump is understanding this, because even in that Truth Social tweet, he said that he thought he was his friend. And that is where the problem lies, is because every single time we start talking about sanctions onto Russia and doing things, for some reason, Donald Trump thinks there's some kind of loyalty that Vladimir Putin has with him, though there is none. And it almost seems like Vladimir Putin knows that Donald Trump thinks of him like this, and so he uses it to his advantage. Every time the U.S. gets closer to sanctions or weapons for Ukraine, we see Putin do something, which is why Lavrov announced on the same day that Trump gave Russia 2 weeks, which is like, okay, another 2 weeks of Russia killing more civilians, that there was going to be a meeting, randomly. Which leads us to today. We're seeing a lot of information coming out in which Zelensky said that Russia is yet to send any of its negotiation proposals to Ukraine or any other kind of, whether they be the United States or Europe or any other country, even Turkey, where this was supposed to take place. He says this hasn't happened yet. No one has gotten this information. And so Zelensky is accusing Moscow to do everything that it can to ensure that the next possible meeting has no meaning behind it. To quote Zelensky, he says, "For a meeting to be meaningful, its agenda must be clear, and the negotiations must be properly prepared," adding that Ukraine has sent its proposals to Russia, reaffirming its readiness for a full and unconditional ceasefire, though Ukraine has heard nothing from Russia. And then we heard from the Ukrainian foreign minister, who reiterated that Kyiv has already sent its own version of future steps, and that Moscow now must accept an unconditional ceasefire to pave way for some kind of broader negotiations. Now, Russia responded to this in the way that you think that Russia would. Now, this is coming from the Russian UN representative. This is the envoy. He said in a message earlier today, reported by TASS News, the Russian news agency, saying, "In principle, we are ready to consider the possibility of establishing a ceasefire, which would allow for a sustainable resolution to the root causes of the conflict." Now, he's saying here they're ready to consider a possibility of establishing a ceasefire, which means there are steps in there that they would want done beforehand, in which he does continue by saying, during the ceasefire, it is essential that Western countries stop supplying weapons to the Kyiv regime and that Ukraine halts its mobilization, saying that ultimately, before we even have a ceasefire, Ukraine, you must agree that you cannot get any more weapons from the West and train your soldiers. which you know as much as I do means that Russia is going to be doing that exactly. They're still having North Korean troops inside of Russia in which they're training. They're still getting weapons from North Korea, parts from China, and drones from Iran. And yet Ukraine can't get weapons. And then he took it a step further by threatening Ukraine again, by saying that Moscow would continue and intensify military operations for as long as necessary. It doesn't make any sense here. Russia is unwilling to actually come to the peace talks and negotiate. But they demand that Ukraine stop everything that they're doing and just kind of stand there? The Russian military, during their ceasefires, never just stood there when their own country called for a ceasefire. What do you think would happen if Ukraine just dropped all their arms today and just stood there? Exactly. That is what Russia is asking of Ukraine in order just to have a discussion about ceasefires. It doesn't make any sense. And so that's why Zelensky is saying from the get-go that, well, it seems like Russia, they don't want this to end. And so in his nightly speech, he says, it was Russia that started this war. It is Russia that must stop the killings and the destruction of lives. It is very important that this is voiced in the media and Congress and all over the world's influential offices. If Russia continues to speak in the language of ultimatums, if it tries to blackmail the world with the continuation of war, it must receive a strong response, a response from the United States, from Europe, and from everyone in the world who wants peace and who's declared their support for a ceasefire and for diplomacy. Remember, Ukraine gave what it wants for a full, unconditional ceasefire. That's all we're asking for. Let's stop fighting now. Let's stop the killing now. Stop killing our civilians right now. If you stop, we stop, and then we could talk about these problems. Russia wants to solve the problems, and until the problem is solved, they're going to keep killing civilians every day. And here's the thing. I get it. Your news isn't showing every single night what Russia is doing to Ukraine. I know they're not. Because when I do a video online on TikTok, people go, oh, that war is still that bad? Yeah. And I've got so many reporters on the ground feeding me intel and information about things, and things have gotten worse. Heck, I've gotten videos from last night in places like Odessa and Kyiv in which drones are going by, and you can hear it as it goes by, and it's terrifying because it's pitch dark out, and then boom, an explosion. And I've got videos like this, which was sent to me earlier today. And what's upsetting about that is the fact that Donald Trump is asked about these things happening every single time. And for some reason, he doesn't say that Vladimir Putin is the bad guy. He just says that he's disappointed. I don't know how that does anything, because you and I both know that Vladimir Putin is the bad guy. He's a dictator. He's going to be up in the books with Hitler, no matter what way you look at this. When it comes to genocide and things that have happened in the world, you've got Hitler and you got Vladimir Putin. And so today in the Oval Office with that press conference with Elon Musk, we've got Donald Trump saying that he was surprised and disappointed by Russia and Putin's recent attacks on Ukraine, but then refused to answer whether or not he considers him a bad guy. Because Donald Trump isn't living in the reality of this war, to him, it is such a faraway problem it doesn't concern him. That's why he doesn't look to end this war anytime soon. Because even during that same statement, he says, that Zelensky is stubborn. And you say to yourself, stubborn in what way? Because he refuses to surrender his country? He refuses to allow more civilians to die every day? In Trump's mindset, it's like, Ukraine, just give up. The killing would stop if you just gave up. In what world is that an okay thinking? There's not one thought there that makes you go, oh yeah, you know what, you're right. They should just ignore the fact that hundreds of thousands of their soldiers and civilians were killed every day and lost their lives and their houses and their homes. They should just forget about that. and just give up their land. Even though, let's be realistic, if Ukraine even did that, like we look at Crimea, Russia would just regroup in X amount of years and invade further. Because that's all that Vladimir Putin actually cares about. He just wants that country for his own. He wants that to be a part of the Soviet Union. That leads us to what's going to happen on Monday. Conversations are going to be happening. We know that Russia's going to send their F-team again to go meet with Ukrainians in Istanbul, in which Zelensky actually spoke to leadership in Istanbul in Turkey, and no one knows what the agenda is. The only outcome we should be having from these meetings is a ceasefire, and Russia is the only one preventing that from happening, which means the only thing as the United States and the West should be doing is more support for Ukraine, more sanctions onto Russia, in which we do have senators like Senator Graham from South Carolina, who has a bill with 82 senators ready to sign, in which this bill could put tariffs on the countries who are buying Russian gas and oil, in which Russia would suffer. But they're scared to pass it because they know that if they try to pass it, and it gets to Trump's desk, there's a possibility he won't sign it, because at the end of the day, Donald Trump doesn't see Putin as the bad guy. He sees him as a friend that he's disappointed in. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments section below. As a reminder, we started a Substack, so if you want to go ahead and get these videos emailed out to you and my newsletters plus a bunch of videos throughout the day, go ahead and click the link in the description of this video. And if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and give this video a thumbs up. I'm Joey. Stay safe.